Welcome to our pod, and by that I mean on Wednesdays we read. I'm Hannah.
I'm Laura.
And we are usually two best friends who do a deep dive into a new book series, one book at a time. But today we are
Three best friends.
because we are welcoming to the pod Jeff Spate. I'm so sorry. Is that the correct way to pronounce your last name?
That is the correct way to pronounce it, yes.
Perfect. Thank you.
We got it right.
So we have Jeff Spate on the podcast, who wrote the wonderful book Paladin Unbound. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. I feel like I've known you guys forever, so I'm glad we're doing this.
Finally, like face to face.
Yes.
Like quote unquote in-person meeting.
Yep.
I know. You have been someone who's been like with our pod since the very beginning.
I know.
So
you've been so supportive of us. It's been great to have you on, actually.
Yeah, we've been very excited to make this happen. So we're excited to talk about this book. So, Jeff, can you tell everyone a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, well, I'm Jeff Spate. I live in Connecticut, married with 3 boys and 3 dogs and a bunch of other scattered animals around the house. And I work professionally as an investor and have written 2 books, Paladin Unbound and Mystic Reborn, with the 3rd one on the way. So
exciting.
Yeah.
That's exciting. Jeff, can you tell us a little bit about you as a reader and like what books got you into reading?
Yeah, sure. The first book, I don't even remember the author's name at this point, but the first book I really remember grabbing me as a young reader was a book called The Red Badge of Courage.
Oh, yeah.
Which was a really neat account of war in early America and all that. It really kind of grabbed me as a fantastic story. It wasn't long after that I started finding fantasy books, though, and I had seen a cartoon version of The Hobbit on TV when I was younger, and had heard that it was from a book by this guy, J.R.R. Tolkien, and went and found it and dove into The Hobbit and kind of never looked back. It's kind of a little cliche at this point, but that's kind of the origin story of me as a reader.
Is The Hobbit that you're talking about, the cartoon version, is that the one where Gollum looks almost frog-like?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, I can also recall that one vividly.
I showed it to my kids, and they were absolutely terrified by the animation in it. So
it is kind of scary, especially if you're used to more of like a Disney.
Yeah.
It's also weird to like think about stuff that terrified you as a child when you're an adult, where it's like, oh, I could totally get where that would be scary, but I didn't expect it to be scary.
Yes. Yeah.
My dad will often like comment about how like the Rankin and Bass, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. He's like, that was like rated X. That came out when I was a little kid. I'm like, it's not rated X.
It's not.
Not the greatest animation.
It just scared you personally. So
Jeff, what is your writing process like? Are you a plotter or a pantser, or are you someone that like has all the Excel sheets with everything to keep track of all of your worlds and writing processes?
Yeah, well, I would say that in a way I'm still kind of figuring that out. It's been kind of an evolution for me. I mean, Paladin Unbound was the first book I wrote, and I kind of wrote it as an accident. I had started off building the world and everything and the characters for a Dungeons and Dragons campaign that I was trying to get my kids involved in and teach them how to play this game I grew up loving. And so I way overdid it for 3 little boys at the time, and created all these great characters in this really in-depth world. And we played for a few hours, and they were kind of like, "This is really cool. Let's go back to playing Roblox or something like that," And I was, like, oh, wow, I spent a lot of time on this and everything. I'm going to just write the story that I was going to lead them through on, this journey. And so I started writing what became Paladin Unbound. It changed quite a bit along the way. I pantsed it 100%, followed every twist and turn the way the story took me and everything, and didn't really know how I was going to wrap it up. And from there, things have kind of evolved. Mystic Reborn, because with the sequel, you have to kind of you have to be aware of continuity, all those kind of things. I did kind of a soft outline for that. just to kind of make sure I was hitting the major plot points along the way. And similar process for the third book, God Ascended, which will be out hopefully at the beginning of next year. And then for this most recent book that I'm working on now, I outlined the whole thing. I just wanted to see what that was like, and if it was going to accelerate the process for me or remove the creativity from the process or what. And so we'll see how that goes.
That's cool to see how your writing journey has kind of evolved as you've gone along.
Yeah, I think, I never had the opportunity to really form good habits as a writer before because it kind of came out of nowhere. It was kind of all new. So, I've kind of been learning as I've gone with each book, and I think I'm getting better at it, getting more efficient at the process, and so it seems to be working.
That's awesome.
That's great.
Can you, like you said, this was born out of creating a D&D campaign. Can you tell us a little bit about your history with like Dungeons and Dragons and RPG games, like how that brought you to writing this world?
Yeah, so it goes back to middle school for me, and that's going back a long time, unfortunately, at this point. And so it was the 80s when Dungeons and Dragons was really in its first heyday. And, a few friends of mine and I got together. We were the tiny nerdy kids at school, and I started playing this game, Dungeons and Dragons, and just really got into it. And it kind of became a lifelong passion. You can kind of see behind me all the minis and all that kind of stuff that I still use today. So, kind of followed it as it evolved, lost track of it for a while when I was, in college and stuff like that, played more Magic the Gathering and stuff like that at that point, and then came back to it and, really got back into it and took on more of a dungeon master role and everything as I was teaching my kids and leading friends through games and stuff like that. So it's been a great journey. It's being a dungeon master is really being a storyteller, right? And so you have to do all that work, homebrewing a world, building characters, and everything that you would do when you're writing a book, but live action and kind of, off the cuff kind of impromptu stuff. So it's a little bit less safe in terms of having to come up with things on the fly.
I noticed, so the first time I read this book was last year. I hadn't really done anything with D&D before. And then Laura and I recently did an episode where we played D&D, where my partner, who is a dungeon master, helped us like through our first D&D. And then I read this book for a second time preparing for the interview. And it made me appreciate so much of your world building because like it just does feel like its own little piece of like D&D lore almost in some ways. And it was just very impressive to read, having the knowledge that I have now. So
thank you. I'm glad to hear you got a chance to play. You guys should definitely pick it up. It's a great hobby, a lot of fun. You make some great friends along the way. And so that's awesome. But thank you for the compliment.
Of course.
I definitely need to join a D&D campaign because at this point I have two friends, you and Hannah. So I could use some more. But going back to it,
cool. Like today, you can play online and do all kinds of things, right? Those weren't options when you had to go find yourself, 4 or 5 other kids that had tried doing that in middle school, like approaching some kid, like, hey, you want to play this fantasy role-playing game that
the pressure
play? It was terrible. Now you can find all kinds of communities online. It's much more accepted.
Well, like my partner's been doing it for like years with his friends and they just meet online. And I can't imagine being in middle school and being like, do you want to join my D&D campaign? We have to meet on Thursdays at 5 and then we do it for an hour. It's a strange world to think about. So
absolutely.
Going back to what Hannah was saying about the world building, I just want to kind of talk about that a little more because the world of Evelium is like really vast and interesting. So what was it like to develop this world, and what is your world building process like?
Yeah, so that's a great question because it's really something that the world kind of grew over time, because I started off with something that was more or less hashed out, and I knew kind of the big things that I wanted involved. I had, you know, a big part for me was it's not just building the world, but the pantheon, the belief system, the all that kind of stuff, which again, like I said, overkill when you're talking about 10-year-olds and 8-year-olds and stuff like that. But you know, I went through that whole process, and I have for all the worlds that I've built playing Dungeons and Dragons, because all that stuff is very important in how magic works and how, you know, all those things. And the magic in these books particularly are directly linked to the gods and the relationships with the gods and everything. And so that part of it's, you know, really, really important. You know, but it's about finding something unique, something interesting. And I like to have kind of a glossy sheen on top and then a lot of dark undertones, things going on below the surface that you might not see when you first, you know, get introduced to the world. So for me, that's one of the big, you know, fun parts of it is kind of burying those little things in there that are maybe a little unexpected.
Well, something I also love about the world building of this land is the maps you have. Like I was looking at the second book and I was really admiring the maps. So how did you go about like getting those created and, you know, implementing those into the book? Because I don't think anyone really asks about maps as much as they should.
This is actually a really interesting story.
Oh.
So shortly before Paladin Bound was supposed to be published, I was expecting to get my cover art and my map from an artist that my publisher, Literary Wanderlust, hired. And the day I'm expecting it, I get a text from my publisher saying, "Can we talk?"
No.
And it turned out that the artist, for personal reasons, wasn't able to do the work.
Hmm.
It was very last minute, and the choices were, we can do kind of a quick and easy cover, forget the maps, and publish it, or delay it. I didn't really want to do either.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, give me 24 hours and I'll see what I can do. I got in touch with Zach Argyle, who you probably know.
Dreadlight, yeah.
Yep. And talked to him about his cover artist, Omer Barak Anal, and got in touch with Omer, and he was gracious enough to make me a cover in a very short turnaround, unexpected. Once I explained the situation, from what I basically scribbled, you know, send him, say, "Can you do this for me?" He like got COVID in the middle of it.
Oh
you know, did it while he was sick. I mean, it was just, you know, but he turned around and produced the cover for Paladin Unbound.
And it's a really great cover.
Yeah, it's
yeah, I love the way it came out. And similar for the map, I got in touch with Thomas Ray, who's a French fantasy cartographer, which sounds like a wonderful job.
Yeah.
That's what he does. He does, you know, creates all these great fantasy maps for games and books and all that stuff. And him and I had known each other a little bit, just interacting online, because I liked his art so much and some of the maps that he's done. And so I reached out to him and again said, it's kind of a last minute thing, but I need a map of this continent for my book. And again, he was nice enough to do that for me last minute. And so we were able to get the book out on time with a map that was probably better than anything I was going to get from the other artist anyway, and a cover that I think really resonates. So it really turned out well, but a little bit of stress there coming to the finish line.
Only a little bit. Only something.
Totally worth it though, because the cover is great.
And honestly,
well, that was the thing. It was to rush the cover. I was like, you know, I get it. Don't judge a book by its cover, but really everybody judges a book by its cover. I mean, that's the first thing you see. It's the first interaction you have, right? Is the visual interaction. You say, oh, that looks cool, or it doesn't, right? And so I didn't want to just rush something and get something done quickly. And I still wanted to hit the publication date that I was kind of laying out to people. So
yeah,
we were able to make it work out.
That's amazing.
So impressive. Yeah.
Yeah.
So something I really appreciated was and I thought it was kind of cool too. At the beginning of each chapter, there's a reference to the history of the world. Mm-hmm. Why did you choose to include those snippets of history in the book in this way?
So I have a degree in archaeology.
Okay.
and it's something that I've always loved. And so I wanted to write the archives of Evelium, as something where they were kind of looking back from a future state on this lore that happened, thousands of years ago. And so you could tell in those little quotes that there are different time periods that are, noted and everything. And so that's what it is. Basically, it's how would it look if these stories were cobbled together by what people had discovered so, much further into the future, from the ruins of a past civilization, kind of a thing. And, and I have those quotes thread throughout. So that's how that kind of came about.
Well, I always love hearing about people's backgrounds and how it affected their work. And
by the way, I regretted that after book 1, because then I had to do them for book 2 and book 3, and I was like,
set a precedent now.
40 something chapters for each book, and it's a lot of quotes to come up with, and a lot of other books and things to kind of write, right? Because I've got all these different sources that they come from, people's diaries and all kinds of stuff, and that's actually one of the trickiest parts of writing the books.
By the 4th book, you're going to be like, I ate toast for breakfast or something. Yeah, it's just an ancient philosopher.
Back in this day, we actually had carrots as a source of.
Yeah, the 4th book, I think it'll be done a little bit differently.
Okay.
Again, because that is really a complicated part of it. The 4th book will take place in a different period of time, in the same world. So I'm going to handle it a little bit differently, though. So.
Well, we've asked you so many questions about the world building. Like, that's all of our first questions, because you did such a great job of building this world. But Paladin Unbound and Mystic Reborn follow the main character, Umra. And please tell me if I'm mispronouncing anything.
No, that's right.
And this is a character who has to face a great deal of prejudice and overcome many stereotypes in order to meet his true potential, because he is half orc. What made you want to follow this type of person?
So I've always liked kind of atypical characters, and somebody who might surprise you and break the mold of what people have historically thought of those kind of characters. I got a lot of criticism for that, of how I handled this half orc, and he's such a gentle soul and all that kind of stuff. And it's just, some people, like their, preconceptions on these things and stick with it. Some people have loved it. That I took what was a half orc and turned it into this, really kind of white knight kind of character who does everything, with a strong moral compass and everything. And so I just wanted to take that and kind of flip it upside down and treat that kind of character a little bit differently than it normally does.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, you still have like layers of it, where there are other half orcs or orcs at the beginning of the novel where you're like, oh, there are a multitude of personalities here, because no one is the same. So it's interesting that people criticized that.
Yeah, so it starts off with him and his kind of band of mercenaries, all are half orcs, and they kind of came together over a period of years, kind of found each other and kind of created this second family. They were all kind of on their own. They're all shunned by society, who treats them, like they're mongrels. And so they're kind of just roaming, looking for jobs and all that kind of stuff. And so there are a variety of personalities in that little group at the beginning. And, I thought that was appropriate, given that they aren't all from the same background. And, Umra being raised at a church, basically, a temple. And, from a very young age, he did have an education and did have a different upbringing than what most of his people would have experienced, right? And so, he does speak with a decent vocabulary. Another thing people have called out, like, orcs don't talk like that. And I'm like, well,
this one does.
Yeah.
People are so interested in making sure it's quote unquote real, and it's like, but orcs aren't real. This one can do whatever he wants.
Yeah, in my world, they could all be scientists if I want them to be.
Yes.
Spoiler alert: orcs aren't real. Neither are dragons.
So But it's funny when I kind of enjoy pushing those buttons a little bit and seeing what the responses are, and you never take that stuff personally. It's all, people are, once you publish a book, it's everybody else's, right?
Yeah.
So, they can interpret it the way they want to, and they can love it, they can hate it, they can do whatever. And, you gotta, have a little bit of thick skin from time to time, but it's all good. And, so anyway, so creating that character, where I left off with my sons, were they come upon this half orc in armor laying in the street unconscious, and what are they going to do? And they were like, all right, let's take a break. And we never got back past that front, which happens very early in the book, right?
Yeah.
And so from there, we got to meet Umra and really dig into him as a character.
Well, I'm glad that you did go back to Umra and like develop this character more, because I feel like he's really a good example of how a person can start to believe things about themselves after they've been told them repeatedly, even if they're not true. And it can kind of cause you to like turn inward and feel less connected to others, because a lot of that happens. And you see Umra struggle with rising to the occasion, really, because he's like, oh no, I'm not that good, like there's no way, because he's been told these things so much. So I don't really see him so much as a reluctant hero, but he really had to overcome all these preconceived notions. And was that really intentional when you were writing the character, or what was it like to kind of get into those thoughts that he has?
Yeah, so I'd say the one thing that Umar and I share are our respective social anxieties. Let's put it that way. So it was very easy for me to tap into that aspect of him, because I grew up as a pretty anxious kid, and did a lot of work to get over that stuff. And even still today, it's a constant struggle. So that I thought was, someone in his situation who had experienced all that, had been ripped away from his family and then raised by a monk, and then in a sheltered environment, and then cast out into the world, only to be shunned by everybody. Imagine how that person would feel and how they would act. And I think you would withdraw, and you would kind of, and you might go and find yourself, think of yourself as being no better than a mercenary or something like that, and hide who you really are. And that's kind of where we meet him, is he's in this hole where he's hiding who he really is, and he's just going around taking these jobs, doing whatever he can to get by and to feed his friends that he's kind of taken responsibility for. So yeah, he has to overcome a lot, and he needs a shove in order to kind of come out of his shell and admit who he really is, and accept that. So
well, and in this novel, the shove is relatively interesting, because you bring in different things like gods who have left the earth, or who are trapped, or who have decided to remain on earth and kind of, leave behind their godliness. And then you have these like pernicious characters coming into the woodworks trying to sacrifice like an obscene amount of souls.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot of heavy work. I actually had to calculate the size of the pit and how much blood would actually be in it. So how many people would actually have to be sacrificed in order to do that. All that was,
nobody wants to come across that geometry.
Yeah. So that was, that's the analyst in me coming out there. I had to make sure I had that all calculated right. And, so
that is amazing.
Yeah, a lot going on.
Wow, that's so impressive. It's really interesting to see all the different lore you bring into this world, because and it must go back to your, you said your studies in school, where you're like, oh, I'm just interested in like religion and the lore of a community. It's really impressive.
So there's also a lot of action in your writing too. And I feel like it flows really well, because Hannah and I are notorious for saying like we just tapped out in this action scene, but I did not find myself tapping out. I was very much like in it, and a lot of things were happening, like you're mentioning like all the blood and everything. There were things happening like, oh wow. And I was just kind of wondering if like action writing is something that comes natural to you, or was it a lot of research? Were you looking into, was there more geometry involved, or like what's that process like?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. I mean, I try to change the tempo of the story when I'm writing those scenes to try to make them feel faster and more impactful. There quite a bit of research in terms of, weapons and the impacts that would have on somebody, and all that kind of stuff, and fighting techniques and things like that. I'm by no means an expert in the martial arts or anything along those lines, but so some research in there, and then it's just for me, it's the fun that takes over, and that's that part in Dungeons and Dragons where you're rolling the dice, right? And you've got 6 seconds per turn, and everything kind of picks up and kind of takes on a life of its own, and so that's for me. I think it came pretty naturally to write at that faster speed. I don't write these big long books. I really enjoy writing the shorter, fast-paced, high-action stories. And so, that's what the goal was to kind of deliver. And so that's where it comes from.
It's very effective. I picked up the second
Yeah.
book last night just because we were reading Dresden Files and I got behind in some of my reading. And like I read 100 pages just sitting there last night and I was like, well, this is
Wow.
just a fun time. So
Mhm.
it really reads well and you do get swept up into the action, even though Laura and I are notorious for not loving most action scenes. So you did a great job.
Well, thank you.
Um, I also love that you brought in a sentient sword into the
Force
mix.
attack.
Mhm.
What brought you to that idea?
Yeah, I was thinking about, these vestiges from a bygone age, right? These things that the adventurers would potentially find along their journeys and stuff like that, and thought about, that after his confrontation with the vampire, and they kind of go back to, um, the keep. What could he potentially find down there? And I had written this section of lore about the old Evanese culture back, during the Age of Grace, which is the age when gods walked Tiveriel with the humans, right?
Mhm.
And I thought about this culture. And they're very high magic, and the magic has kind of slowly been dying off in the world. And so I was thinking about, all the paladins. He's the last paladin, but like all the paladins that used to be there, these armies of these holy warriors and everything that lived with the gods and all that kind of stuff. And I thought, I was like, how cool would it be to like have him find a sword that was imbued with the soul of a paladin from back then, and have it be corrupted, and then him kind of, as he's kind of repairing himself, kind of repairing the sword as they journey together. And that's kind of where that came from.
So
I love it
neat.
because they have such a fun relationship too, where there's definitely this give and take. I won't spoil it, but there was a moment that got me very scared towards the end. So, but no, it's a very well done relationship between the two of them. But found family and friendship seems to be an important theme in Paladin Unbound, and really for all the dark things that are happening, it was nice to see how these themes were worked in. Did you feel that it was like important to include found family and friendship in your story?
Yeah, it's a trope I love that whole notion that you can be cast out into the world beyond your own, and then meet people that you just kind of gel with, and a small tight group. I've never been one to have a million friends. I've always been one to have a few really good friends. And so, the whole notion of loyalty and camaraderie, and that bond being almost tighter than the blood bond, because you found each other and you chose to be with each other as opposed to being forced into it. That always really appealed to me. And so I did want it to be a big theme throughout the book.
I love
Nice.
that.
Well, and this is going into a little bit more spoiler territory. So if you have not read Paladin Unbound, go read it now and come back. But something I thought was really important about this found family is the fact that Umra loses his first found family and then he finds this other one and he has this unique experience where he is grieving, but also meeting new people that he's making a connection with. And was there something that made you kind of want to explore that loss and sense of finding others like through your loss?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's, I kind of alluded to it earlier, is that I call it Umra's nudge. That he had to lose um, something dear to him in order for him to realize that hiding from what he really is, who he really is, was was costing him the things most important to him, right? And so, how do you get someone out from hiding in that shell? And there are a couple ways, and I thought for him the most appropriate way would be to suffer this loss and then to have to, realize that it was really his fault. He had the power at any point in time to put an end to that, and he chose not to, and it cost him dearly. And so um, that's the moment where um, he realizes he has no choice but to accept who he really is and do the right thing. And so my oldest son is still angry with me for that. Um, he did not like that I did that. And I intentionally tried to write those characters to be very appealing to people and want them to get invested in a little bit. And then I kind of just ripped the Band-Aid off. And um, you know, uh, I thought it was a good way to kind of kick Umar out of the nest, so to speak. So that's how that happened.
I love the idea of your son being like, I just can't believe you killed all those awesome characters.
Oh yeah, no, they legitimately angry with me. And still, if it ever comes up, it's an issue. So
So one of the characters I find pretty interesting is Shadow, who
yeah,
is a Rysarian. Is that how you say it?
yep,
Can you tell us a little more about Shadow and what it was like to craft this character?
yeah, he's fun. He's kind of the rogue, in the shadows, literally. I mean, and not too on the nose to name him that, but he's another outcast though.
Mhm.
He's what some people would call a drow, a dark elf, a Drizzt Do'Urden character. Um, he comes from this part of Tyveriel beneath the surface, subterranean. And as a child, he was kind of interested in this thing that was called the sun, and he snuck up to look at it and was cast out of his society for it, and just kind of got fell into bed with this organization called the Hands of Time, which is a kind of a crime organization that kind of operates within Evelium, and got trained in all these, cool roguish things, and then struck out on his own. Uh, Underneath the veneer of this plucky, witty rogue who doesn't seem to care, there's like a really sweet, endearing person who always ends up doing the right thing, even if he's complaining about it while he's doing it. And he was one of the most fun characters to write for me, particularly in the action scenes. I loved having him kind of just sweeping through a mess and stuff like that. So he was a lot of fun, and I'd like to think we'll see more of him as things evolve here, but we'll see.
I know Laura said that he was one of her more interesting characters, but do you have a favorite character that you write for? And was there a character that you had difficulty with?
Um, yeah, that's a great question. So I mean, obviously Umra, uh, you know, dear to my heart. I mean, there's a reason he's the protagonist. I really wanted to bring his story to light. So I'd say, while he could be challenging at times, um, uh, probably mostly because I identified a lot with some of his struggles, so it was sometimes hard for me to get that out on paper. He's definitely kind of my favorite character, and so um, the other members of the Barrows Pact, I think, Lawden is actually taken directly from my first D&D character I ever played,
Oh, that's so
which was
fun.
like a ranger type character. And, I always thought about that character because I played him for a few years. And so I kind of recreated that character for to play Lawden. So that's another one that's really, really close to me. So
I
in
love that.
terms of difficulty, So writing a true villain that mindlessly or not even mindlessly, just, believes in what he's doing and what he's doing is right. And he's doing all these terrible things and justifying it, um, was harder for me. Evron Alabaster was, dispassionate as to what he was doing as long as he was achieving his goal. And writing that kind of a character who would just, such disregard for life and anything that's good was harder for me to write. But I felt like I kind of liked the Umra versus Evron Alabaster, because the good versus the evil is very, there's no morally gray here. It's, you're on the two sides of the spectrum, and I kind of wanted to bring a little bit of that back, because it reminded me of a lot of the fantasy I grew up reading and, kind of cut my teeth on. And so today, the morally gray stuff it's great. A lot of people do it wonderfully well. I've read tons of great stories that involve those kind of characters, but I kind of wanted to reach back a little bit further into some of the stuff I grew up reading.
I dig that. So you mentioned this earlier about storytelling, but I want to just kind of like dig into it a little more, because Paladin Unbound is really special because it's like stories contained within a story. We have characters telling stories about other characters, and then we're getting the history of the world. And so I'm just kind of curious, like, what does storytelling mean to you as a writer, and why did you choose to show the way that stories can weave together and change us or not define us?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's, one of the oldest forms of, art, in terms of getting people together, um, probably around a fire somewhere, at the beginning of time. And, people are sitting there just telling stories about gods and whatever else that they're, things they don't understand, and trying to make sense of the world they live in and all that. And so, for me, that's the wonder of storytelling. Is it's so long, it's so old, and uh, can have such an impact on people. And the fact that you can tell the same story to 1,000 different people and get 1,000 different interpretations. I mean, I think it's just such a unique craft and everything that, I think that's why I wanted to take a relatively short book. It's not short, but, relatively short book compared to today's standards in fantasy, and really try to weave a pretty complex story into a tight little package.
I would think that's a very good description of the book.
Mhm.
So like I said, I've read a portion of the second book. Can you
Mhm.
tell readers what to expect in the second book, and maybe even a sneak peek into the third book that is hopefully coming out early next year?
Yeah, sure. So, Mystic Reborn takes place a couple years after Paladin Unbound, and we continue following Umra on his journey as he learns what it means to be granted new powers by his gods because of the things that he accomplished in Paladin Unbound. And it sends him on a quest that's unexpected, and some of his naivety shines through in Mystic Reborn, just how sheltered and unworldly he actually is, kind of comes through in that book. And at the same time, there's a new threat that's very much unexpected. That's while he's off doing his thing, learning what it means to be a mystic, his friends are kind of left trying to protect Evelium from this new threat. And so we split the party, which is something you're never supposed to do in Dungeons and
No.
Dragons, right? And so you split the party and create tension by having them both confront their own challenges along the way. And so I like to think of Mystic Reborn a little bit like my Empire Strikes Back.
Nice.
Ooh.
I really am enjoying this book. There's a little bit more political intrigue than the last book. Did you enjoy kind of bringing that into it?
Yeah, well, it's, you know, the Paladin Bound is very much just a hero's journey, right? We're
Mhm.
following Umra for the most part, on that adventure, and we're learning about who he is and all these things he can do. And then Mystic Reborn, we definitely spend more time diving into the world and how things work and the conflicts that are alluded to in Paladin Unbound, but we really don't hash them out. And so you get into more of that. And so it was fun, but I also didn't want to belabor it and have, chapter after chapter of political debate and all that kind of stuff. So, we touch on it in Paladin Unbound. We build out more of it in Mystic Reborn. And then the third book, God Ascended, um, which leaves us off at the end of Mystic Reborn for Umra, presents a whole number, of new challenges for both sides of the party. So, well,
Exciting.
I don't want to tell you too much about that
No.
right now, but I'm in the middle of hopefully final edits on that, and we're aiming for a January 1st, 2025
Wow.
date. Hopefully we'll be able to stick to that,
Awesome.
New Year, baby.
but
Well,
not too far away.
for those who haven't read Mystic Reborn, definitely pick it up. It's very interesting. You get a little bit more into the history of Umra, which I loved, and I also loved just delving deeper into his relationship with his adopted father, because I thought you had a very unique perspective on it that we don't see much, which is a bond between a child and their adopted parent who isn't a mom. Like, I feel like we rarely talk about that. I thought that was very cool. So,
Yeah, it was a fun relationship to kind of think about because, when Umra was 4, he lost his parents and kind of wandered out of the Orc homeland into uh, Evelium proper, so to speak, and was found by this monk who took him in and took this kid who was out of control, half orc 4-year-old, and trained him because he saw something special in him that other people didn't see. And he knew a little bit more about the problems the world was facing and what it might need, and the misdeeds of prior generations to get rid of things like the paladins and things like that, the risks that brought with it. And so he takes it upon himself to raise Umra and train him and be his father, and names him the Peacebreaker, Umar the Peacebreaker, because he was such a loud, noisy kid. In this culture, in the orc culture, in my world, when you come of age, you get a name that is fitting for who you are, for your personality. So you have your first name growing up, and then when you hit a certain age, you get, you're the Peacebreaker added to it, based on something great you've done or something bad you've done or whatever it could be. And so wanting to stick with a little bit of Umar's culture, his adopted father gave him the name Umar the Peacebreaker because he was so loud and disruptive around the monastery where he grew up.
adorable.
Love that. Jeff, I always think about adaptations when I'm reading books. Have you thought about like an adaptation of your books and like what that would look like or how you would like it to look, or maybe even like casting or anything like that?
It'd be cool, wouldn't it? I mean, um, yeah, I've always wondered if it would make sense as live action or would it make sense as like an animation or something like that. I
Well,
don't
I'm
know.
thinking of
Like
like
an adult
Delicious in
animation would be
Dungeon, and it I feel like this story would fit perfectly in like a Delicious in Dungeon type world where it's
That
like
show is
anime style.
hysterical. I love that
I
show.
love it so much.
Yeah, absolutely hysterical. I mean, the idea of an explorer, an adventurer wanting to taste all the monsters he kills as he
Yeah.
shoots. Just what a weird, quirky concept and so well done. So I've actually really enjoyed that show. But I could see it in animated form. I could see it in live action as well. Probably a little harder to do and pull off and make it look good.
Yeah.
But it could be done. I just need a Lord of the Rings budget for
Make sure it's not the Wheel of Time budget, because we still think about
The Trollocs running.
The Trollocs running. It's just like straight out of a very bad video game. So
it.
Uh-huh. Well, Jeff, we do appreciate having you on. Can you tell us some things
Yes.
that you're reading, watching, and or enjoying right now?
Yeah, sure. I'm in the process of finishing Legacy of the Brightwash by Crystal Matar, which is a
Yay.
fantastic book.
Oh,
I'm
God.
really enjoying that. Written by a fantastic person.
Yes.
So really enjoying that. Next up is Stellar Instinct by Jonathan Navarre.
That's one of my faves.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
He is, you get one of the pleasant surprises of becoming an indie author is, you've made all these friends. You guys, all these other people, whether it's from the review community, or the other authors, and Jonathan's become a good friend, and so I'm really looking forward to reading this book, having read his first trilogy and everything, which I thought was fantastic.
Yeah, it's a great trilogy, and then I like you, I will just always shout out Jonathan's work just because he has been so kind to me.
He's another great person, and a great writer. His stories are so fun. So looking forward to that next. So those are probably the two things that I'm active on right now in terms of reading.
Awesome. And can you tell readers where they can find you?
Yeah, I'm on X, I guess it's called these days.
Forever Twitter.
The artist formerly known as Twitter.
Yes. And then Instagram at JeffSP8. And my website, jeffreyspate.com. Probably the best ways to track me down.
Also, you have a cool website. I was checking that out earlier and I was like, oh, this is really cool. I love how this is formatted.
Thank you. Yeah, it's fun. I'm actually in the process of doing some rework on it, because for me, it was great for Paladin Unbound. It kind of immerses you in the story, right? But now that Mystic Reborn is out, I've got a third book coming out, and I've built out more around the world and all that kind of stuff. I want to broaden it to be more of an author's website, and then hopefully still have some of that stuff in there for each of the books. So we'll see, but that's a kind of a work in progress right now.
Well, everyone should go look at Jeff's website, follow him on Twitter or Instagram, whichever you choose, but also make sure you're picking up a copy of Paladin
Unbound. Or request at your library.
Request at your library to get it there. So make sure you're doing all of that, because these books are really great. They're a ton of fun, great world building. I'm very impressed with it. And Jeff,
Paladin Unbound, Mystic Reborn, and Jeff, what was the third book that we need to watch out for on January 1st?
God Ascended.
God
Ascended.
Also great titles. You have some great titles.
Yes.
So
Thank you.
But also, Jeff, we just want to personally thank you for being such a good friend throughout our time here, and we're just so happy to have you on finally.
Well, thank you as well, and for everything you guys do for the community. It's great to meet people like you, and you put a lot of time and effort into this, and it shows. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
And everyone, make sure you're following along as we dive back into our Year of the Butcher next week.
Year of the Dresden.
Year of the Dresden. I always call it the Year of the Butcher. It's just too hard. I'm terrible with names.
It's Jim Butcher's work. We're reading a lot of Jim Butcher stuff.
And it's, so the Year
Follow
of
us
the
on our
Dresden.
pod.
Follow us on our pod, all the places. Look at what we're reading on ourpod.com. You'll find us, I promise. So
Jim Butcher.
the Year of the Dresden. And thank you, Jeff, again.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.